This is not a typical academic season because there are civil disturbances ongoing at universities around the country,
Glenn, that
including
includes
yours
Brown, right?
and mine. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Brown.
Yeah.
The president kind of struck a deal with the encampment that she would take their divestment proposals before the corporation for a formal presentation and vote.
At Brown, they actually came to an entente. Right. Yeah.
Of sorts. But you're at Columbia, which has the eye of the center of the maelstrom or something like that. Cops came in and dragged people out and stuff. They used heavy equipment to enter the second floor window, and it was all a big to do. Is your graduation going to take place?
Not the big commencement ceremony. The students have come up with a way of kind of halfway doing something themselves, but not the classic thing. And Hamilton Hall is where I used to work until just a few years ago. And in the footage that I've seen of the breaking into the building, they broke into the American Studies wing, which is exactly where my office was. And I got to see what used to be my office being broken into with the window on the door broken and the desk I sat at turned over. I mean, this is some real stuff. It's been quite an adventure.
I take it that you take umbrage, that you feel violated.
I don't feel violated by somebody busting up an office that I don't work in anymore. But the Hamilton move was unfortunate. As I wrote in the New York Times, there was a performative aspect to that. Look at what happened in 1968, and to show them that we really mean it, we're going to go bust into Hamilton too. But the thing is, that wasn't going to have any effect. It wasn't going to make Manu Shafi change her mind, or the board of trustees. And I think that took a really useless turn. The encampments was one thing, but to bust up Hamilton Hall as a kind of, cosplay is, that wasn't a good idea, because it was more about drama than actually getting anything done. And it really did remind me of yelling Black Power to a happy crowd, say circa 1968.
Yeah, I saw you say that in the Times, man.
Yeah.
So the analogy, civil rights and these encampments, it feels to me like these encampments are more akin to anti-apartheid demonstrations of the 1980s or something than they are to a sit-in of the 1960s. And I think the move to civil disobedience, taking over Hamilton Hall, I'm inclined to agree with you. It does feel very performative and a reenactment of something, and a kind of, grasping onto a certain idealization of virtue and all that, as opposed to being related in a substantive way to politics in the broadest sense of the term. Except it occurs to me that the motivation is not unilateral. It's not one-dimensional. It's not only the performative protesting anger, but it's also revulsion at what they're seeing happening on the ground in Gaza. The dead baby's being pulled out from under the collapsed building that a gazillion-ton bomb was targeted at to kill a terrorist. So there's something amiss if our discussion of that brouhaha and all that controversy and whatnot fails to take note of that dimension of their motivation, which I think is creditable.
Definitely. Yeah. The question is, once you take over Hamilton Hall, how are you helping the situation in Gaza? It's one thing to say, we're going to camp out in these tents. We want you to stop giving money to Israel and to organizations that could be seen as supporting this war. That makes perfect sense. But when you start breaking windows in Hamilton and turning the desks upside down and blocking the doors, does that help any of those babies? What's it for? And the general idea, I think, was we're going to make a louder noise. But the thing is, what if making the louder noise isn't going to have any effect? What have you done other than show your awareness of something, which is different from actually being interested in changing the situation over across the ocean? It's so easy for human beings to lose a sense of the distinction there.
Okay, so what do you think about this? I can channel my friend Cornel West. Empire. the forces, the large, profound forces that shape political economy at a global scale. The various wars and conflicts in which the United States is enmeshed bespeaks the operation of empire, of military industrial complex, of various kinds of ideological programs. And Israel is a part of that. And the alliance between the United States and Israel, which is at the root of what people are protesting about. I mean, they're Americans, after all. These are American institutions. It's our involvement in the events that are being perpetrated in Gaza that is the subject of critique. And he's going to say there's something fundamentally corrupt there. And that the students may be misguided, as you say that they are, but their outrage and misbehavior is kind of like a, canary in the coal mine or something like that.
The students' outrage makes perfect sense. Having an encampment, sure. And we can talk about the anti-Semitic aspect of it, which made it awkward, especially at Columbia. But the basic idea of being outraged at where the Gaza war has gone makes perfect sense. The question is what you do about it and where it shades off into theater rather than directed action.
Let's talk about John Cage.
Fuck. Oh, Lord.
Tell people what that's about.
I wrote a piece saying that the tone of the protests at Columbia had become such that it was hard to be Jewish on campus, as in some people were already going home before it was explicitly suggested by one of the rabbis that the students follow, that if you are Jewish, not just Israeli, but Jewish, then a lot of these chants, a lot of the facial expressions, the sheer volume and duration of it, where do you draw the line? But there got to be a point where I had experienced so many crying Jewish students in my office and beyond that I thought, somebody needs to say something. And I opened it with saying that I was teaching my music humanities class. And a day that the protest really did take an upward pitch, I was doing John Cage, and one of his pieces asks you to sit in silence for a few minutes, his famous piece, and you're supposed to listen to surrounding sounds. Now, that day, I said, let's not listen to that silence today. There were 5 or 6 Jewish and or Israeli kids in the classroom. And I thought, from the river to the sea, et cetera, that's going to be the silence today. I said, let's just talk about the piece. But I didn't want to put, especially the Jewish students, through sitting and listening carefully to all of that stuff going on practically outside the window. There are times when you think you've seen it all. But what I cannot believe is the avalanche of responses I got from people who thought that it was my job to make those Jewish students listen to that chanting. And furthermore, that if I didn't think that, I don't understand John Cage. Who are we? Where the fuck does that come from? This is the thing. I can completely imagine that you might think that Jewish kids need to listen closely to that. That's your opinion. You feel that they, in a sense, have blood on their hands, or you're going to change them morally or something like that. But how could you possibly think that that's a universal view, that I should feel irresponsible in having shielded those students from that? Glenn, there are people out there who actually think that there was only one way to conduct oneself responsibly in that situation. They really think that. I thought I had seen it all, but yeah.
I find that very amusing, John. Very amusing. I love you, man. I love you. Your sensitivity, your awareness of people's slights. No,
I was very disappointed.
What I wanted to say is, how do you know, because the students were Jewish, that they would have experienced that as you imagined that they would have experienced that? Aren't you projecting or assuming something? Or are you basing this on your personal knowledge of the individuals involved because they came to office hours or something like that? I mean, because there's something essentialist, isn't there, about assuming a Jewish student is going to be disturbed by that particular message? Some would, some wouldn't. There were Jewish students among those who were shouting from the river to the sea, weren't there?
Well,
So where does the Jewishness enter in? Are you projecting something onto those students?
that is a valid point, very valid point. And as it happens, I did know of three based on my personal interactions with them. And I would be quite sure that they would not have been at all happy having to listen to that. As a matter of fact, one of them I had an interaction with that day. So yeah, now your point is interesting. Suppose I didn't know them at all and they hadn't said anything, and I'm just assuming where maybe they were about to run out and be on the line. My sense of things was such that chances were small that that was going to be all of them, or even most of them. But yeah, actually, what colors this a little is that I knew with three. And then with the other ones, I kind of suspected. And actually, one of them later mentioned to me that he approved of that decision.
You said in the piece, didn't you, giving an analogy that you wouldn't force Black students to be subjected to anything similar to that. It would immediately call forth some kind of harsh, repressive reaction if Black students were on the butt end of it.
Oh, yeah. Imagine if they were shouting DEI has got to die. And I say, okay.
And I was thinking, and I was thinking, I was actually surprised to see you say that. I was thinking exactly the opposite. I was thinking if Jared Taylor and Amy Wax were to march around the University of Pennsylvania saying DEI has got to die, we object, and get a bunch of conservative students to scrabble of a handful to go after them, that first of all, they should be able to do it. I'm not advocating. I'm just saying they should be able to do it. It's free speech. And secondly, I'm not sure there's not a powerful learning opportunity implicit in having that be the silent background of a consideration of a John Cage piece, and for the Black students themselves. I mean, I'm not sure why engaging with that isn't, at the end of the day, a more important pedagogic goal than the safety of their feelings. And I'm talking about the Black students, but of course, by inference.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. If Amy Wax and Jared Taylor and a whole bunch of if they decided they're going to
my friend Amy Wax,
they're going to camp out. Now, first of all, the minute they did it, they would be instantly sent to the planet Uranus. I mean, there would be no question.
Yeah, I know. They would not last 5 minutes.
No,
I agree. But they should be able to, in my humble opinion.
I think so, too. They should be able to sit out on the lawn and something like, you are not as smart as us. You're just fit to drive a bus or something. And they're going to do that. I made that up. I don't know what that was. But Black students, if Black students said, this makes me feel unsafe, I just can't stand this, I would say, no, we've got to stop that. We are overextending this word safe. And I felt the same way about the encampments at first. But it's an issue of degree. Let's say that it was hundreds of people yelling things like that, and not just one day or a couple of afternoons, but for weeks and weeks. And it gets louder and louder, and the cops are coming. If a Black student said to me, I'm feeling quite uncomfortable and I'm going to go home, I would completely understand. And I would never fill a classroom. You know, there were Black students in the class too. I would not fill that classroom with DEI has got to die for 4 minutes. No, I would think that was more than anybody should be expected to expect. I would have done the same thing. What do you do to people? You know, what is too much? And opinions will differ, but I think that different opinions in this are also valid, which some people don't seem to understand. Would you subject students to that? Let's say that it's Amy, Jared, and a whole bunch, and they've got signs, and they're right under the window. Would you sit for 4 minutes plus and have students of color listening to this? I would not myself.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I could say yeah, but I think that would be a cheap retort. I think the pressure to protect them from and to avoid the trauma. I mean, that conversation that you're going to have after the 4 minutes and 33 seconds is going to be one hell of a conversation, which is a reason to do it.
And this was a class about music.
The therapeutic versus the kind of enhancing the critical reflection. What do you put people through? I could see tailoring the facts that I presented in a lecture about African American disadvantage so as not to seem to be denigrating Black people in an audience in which I had Black students. You know, how I said whatever I had to say about the Black family or about out of wedlock birth rates or about school failure or about criminal violence, where there was a huge racial disproportion. I would temper, I'd offer qualification, I'd say it, but and then I'd try to indicate that I didn't mean that it was a put down of Black people in some kind of categorical sense. So that kind of concession, and I expect that that's going to be true across the board. I mean, if I were discussing my feelings about Israel in front of Jewish students, I would be very cautious about not wanting to seem to be saying things that they would find to be very offensive. So some kind of deference to that sensibility, even if it compromises the cutting edge of the pedagogic, intellectual growth thing. You should be able to take any argument. You should be able to formulate a response to any argument. That's a good thing, to be able to formulate a response to any argument, but I'm not going to browbeat a student.
There's a line. Yeah.